you will never guess where I am. Alright, maybe that gives it away in the title of this video, but I'm here on my London leg of my Beatles pilgrimage. I'm travelling as far and as wide as I can to find all the amazing places that the Beatles brought to life. And I'm here in London for this video, so thank you very much for clicking, and let's go. So, let's get this video started. My name is Neil Hurst, and I'm about to take you all around London to find all these amazing, iconic places. So, let's start with probably the most iconic outside of Liverpool, Abbey Road.
So, here we are. This is North London, and the place you'll find the old EMI studios, now better known as Abbey Road. It was here that music artists from all over the world have recorded, from Pink Floyd to Oasis, from Adele to Amy Winehouse. Even the iconic scores for the Star Wars movies were all recorded inside these walls. But of course, Abbey Road is forever linked to one band, because it was right here where the Beatles recorded most of their albums, and just outside, they walked across this legendary zebra crossing to create one of the most famous album covers of all time.
So here we are, in London's famous London, right outside this place. This is, of course, Abbey Road Studios, but it was originally called the EMI Studios. You see, back on the 6th of June 1962, this is where the Beatles' journey really did begin for the Fab Four. It was in this building right here that on that fateful day in June, they signed that contract. And, well, the rest is history. George Martin took them under his wing, and every single one of the Beatles' albums was recorded here at Abbey Road.
From Please Please Me to Revolver, Rubber Soul to Sgt. Pepper, Abbey Road really was the creative home of the Beatles. This is where they experimented with tape loops, backwards recordings, and studio effects that changed popular music forever. The studio itself became the instrument, helping the Beatles transform from a live band into pioneers of modern recording. However, one of the main reasons tourists flock from all over the world is to recreate the famous album cover of Abbey Road here on this zebra crossing. It was in August 1969 that the Beatles stepped out to shoot the cover for their Abbey Road album. The entire photo session took less than 10 minutes when photographer Ian McMillan stood on a ladder in the middle of the road while the band walked back and forth as the traffic waited. And still, here we are, 50 years later, and one of the most vital parts of any Beatles pilgrimage has to be walking that zebra crossing and, of course, signing the famous walls of Abbey Road.
So I told you a little bit of a fib. I said it was here that the Beatles' journey actually started in London, but I'm not actually telling the truth there. You see, because about 6 months earlier, in January of 1962, they made their way over to Broadhurst Gardens for the first meeting here in the capital city.
So, after a few selfies on the zebra crossing, well, had to be done, didn't it? We make our way to West Hampstead and the old headquarters of Decca Records.
So, 6 months before that meeting in the June of 1962, the Beatles were brought here to Broadhurst Gardens, actually on New Year's Day, actually. They'd had a meeting booked by their manager, Brian Epstein, with a guy called Dick Rowe. And Dick Rowe just so happened to be the A&R guy at Decca Records. He was the man who could make or break these guys. But how did that go?
Brian Epstein knew that if the Beatles were going to have any sort of success, they had to be signed by one of the biggest labels in London. And where better than the label that looked after some of the biggest stars of the day, including Lonnie Donegan and Tommy Steele. Decca Records was the place to be. So, off to London they headed. Brian Epstein, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and their drummer, Pete Best. That's right, this Decca audition even predates Ringo joining the band.
And here it is, 165 Broadhurst Gardens. It's now home to the ENO, the English National Opera. And I'd love to tell you all about it, but they're painting some lines on the road. It's really noisy, so I'll do it. And then exciting cutaway montage video thingy.
Decca Records was the place to be, and Dick Rowe was the man they needed to impress. They each thought the audition had gone really well, but found out a few days later that Decca didn't want to sign them. In Brian Epstein's 1964 autobiography, Dick Rowe is quoted having rejected the Beatles with the words, "Guitar groups are on their way out, Mr. Epstein." Obviously gutted at the time, this just gave the Beatles that extra drive, and 6 months later, with Ringo behind the drums, they were signed by EMI and their rise to the top really began. But whatever happened to Dick Rowe? Well, he went on to sign the likes of Tom Jones, the Moody Blues, Cat Stevens, and even the Rolling Stones, although he would go down in history as the man who rejected the Beatles. Poor fella. Wasn't it bad enough he had to live with the name Dick Rowe? It's time to jump on the tube and head into central London now, to a place called Manchester Square. This is where we find another iconic Beatles location that doesn't quite look like it used to.
So you're probably asking yourself, what has Beatles history got to do with this particular new build behind me? Well, nothing. If I'm totally honest, absolutely nothing. But there is something to do with the site it's on. You see, this is where the EMI headquarters was, and it was in this building that they took the famous photograph that took on the cover of the Please Please Me, their debut album. It was the famous one of them looking over the balcony, of course, over the banister. Of course, they recreated it in 1969 as well, and that became the cover of the Blue album. And of course, the Please Please Me one became the cover of the Red album as well. So yeah, those famous, iconic photographs were photographed right here, just not in this building.
By early 1963, the Beatles had had massive hits with Love Me Do and Please Please Me, so George Martin, their producer, decided it was time for them to record an album. On the 11th of February 1963, the boys went into Abbey Road and spent a whole day recording the Please Please Me album. Imagine that, the whole album recorded in just one day. The album was huge. It remained in the top 10 for over a year, a record for a debut album that stood for over half a century. The Beatles were really starting to become somebody, but ultimately that meant that for now it was time to say goodbye to Liverpool.
So back in 1963, the Beatles all moved in here at number 57 Green Street. It was after one of their big hits, She Loves You, that Brian Epstein bought this building here, bought the top flat of this building here, and he gave it to the Beatles so they had somewhere to stay when they were in London. But this is a very special place, because this is the only place in the whole world where the Beatles all lived together at exactly the same time. So, if you ever go upstairs, top floor, flat L, 3-bedroom flat. I don't know which Beatle shared with which, who knows, but this is it, number 57 Green Street.
There aren't many photos inside the flat, apart from these here, which were all captured in October 1963 for a Beatles photo shoot. The Fab Four were now making London their home. They had the fancy suits, they had the flat in Mayfair, so now it was time to upgrade their instruments. And where better to pick up the best of the best instruments? Well, in London's West End, of course.
So I'm right in the middle of the West End now, Shaftesbury Avenue, and over there is number 112A, Shaftesbury Avenue. That just happens to be quite an important place.
It's actually 114 Shaftesbury Avenue. Come on, get your facts right, Neil. Now, this delicious looking Chinese restaurant used to be the music shop Drum City. This is where, in 1963, Brian Epstein bought Ringo Starr to buy a brand new set of drums. He told the shop owner, a guy called Ivor Arbiter, that he wanted a logo for the band on the middle of the kick drum. So Ivor quickly sketched the now famous Beatles logo with the long T. He showed it to Epstein, who loved it, and they put it on the drum. Incidentally, Ivor Arbiter is the man credited with bringing karaoke to the UK too. You see, not everybody does good things. So, Ringo now had his drums, but what about the other lads? They needed some presents too. And just round the corner from Drum City is the place we're going to find them, at number 24 Rupert Street. Incidentally though, we have to take a little trip through Rupert Court, one of the places the Fab Four had pictures taken for the cover of the Beatles London book.
So just around the corner from Drum City was where you found Sound City. That was a guitar shop, and it was most famously this building here where George Harrison bought his Gretsch guitar, and the Beatles bought all their guitars here from here as well. But now, as you can see, it's a master pastry makers and master bakers, where all the bakers come and master bake all day. Anyway, they've got all their instruments now, so it's time to get on stage and do some shows, isn't it? And one show they did was just around the corner in a theatre called the London Palladium.
Sunday Night at the London Palladium was the biggest TV show in Britain, and if you appeared on it, you'd officially made it. Broadcast live to millions of people throughout the 1950s and 60s, this show brought together music, comedy and variety on one legendary stage. Hosted by stars such as Bruce Forsyth and Jimmy Tarbuck, it featured everyone from comedians to chart-topping musicians. For the artists, a performance here could launch a career overnight, and for viewers at home, Sunday night meant the whole country watching the same show at the same time. This wasn't just television, this was a national event, every Sunday night.
So finally, I've arrived at a building I actually know a little bit about. You see, if you just found this video on, YouTube's algorithm, you probably don't know who I am, but I'm an actor actually, and I've been lucky enough to perform here at the London Palladium on a few occasions on different TV shows or different theatre shows as well. So anyway, I do know a little bit about this venue. So many megastars have played this stage. Frank Sinatra, Shirley Bassey, Neil Diamond, and of course, the Beatles.
On October the 13th, 1963, the top of the bill stars for Sunday night at the London Palladium were the Beatles. When they stepped out on stage, over 15 million people were watching at home, and thousands more packed the streets outside. The band performed songs such as From Me to You, She Loves You, and I'll Get You, sending the theatre into complete hysteria. Bruce Forsyth famously joked, "For all the people with tickets outside, sorry you couldn't get in," which perfectly captured the chaos of the moment. The next day, newspapers coined a new word to describe what had happened here, and that word was Beatlemania.
So if this is where Beatlemania really began, where did it go stratospheric? Well, at a theatre just up the road. And here we are by YouTube magic. It was in this building here, the Prince of Wales Theatre, that John Lennon famously asked the audience in the cheap seats to clap their hands and everybody else to rattle their jewellery.
Following their success after Sunday night at the London Palladium, theatre impresario Bernard Delfont booked the Beatles for the Royal Variety performance. By now, the Beatles were becoming very well known, and this was their chance to impress royalty, because watching that night was Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. When the show was broadcast on the 10th of November, 21.3 million people sat and watched the Beatles become the biggest stars in Great Britain, and soon the world.
So by 1965, the Beatles had taken over the world. They'd conquered the US, they'd conquered the UK, they'd conquered music, but they were still to conquer the world of movies. And that's where that journey started, right here. Because in 1965, this is where they filmed the movie Hard Day's Night. So, let's take you on a trip down memory lane with that one, eh?
A Hard Day's Night was the Beatles' very first movie. Shot in black and white and directed by Richard Lester, the film follows a fictional day in the life of the band as they dodge fans, rehearse for a TV performance, and cause chaos wherever they go. And it was here, at Marylebone Station, that all that chaos began. It's here that the Beatles arrived by train at the very start of the movie, immediately being chased by screaming fans, which perfectly captured the chaos of Beatlemania back in 1964. The scenes were shot on real platforms with genuine commuters and genuine fans, giving the film its raw, documentary-style feel. And of course, the station hasn't changed that much either. This is the famous covered entrance where the boys ran into the station, and the bit that were in the telephone boxes, well, that's now in here. It's now an M&S food, so just think of that while you're grabbing your Percy Pigs.
So one of the most famous bits of the opening sequence of Hard Day's Night is, of course, them running down here. And of course, George Harrison trips up and plants his face on the floor. Yeah, that happened here on a place called Boston Place, just right next to Marylebone Station. Say that when you're drunk.
After the success of A Hard Day's Night, moviegoers couldn't get enough of the Beatles. The following year came Help, a bigger, brighter and more surreal movie shot around the world showing the band's growing confidence, mixing comedy, adventure and pure 60s style. Then came Magical Mystery Tour, a psychedelic TV film that divided audiences but perfectly reflected the experimental spirit of the late 60s. Around the same time, Yellow Submarine took the Beatles into animation form, a colourful, psychedelic journey that turned their music into a visual art form. And finally, Let It Be, which documented the band's final days together, capturing both creative brilliance and rising tensions. So, from black and white realism to full-blown psychedelia, The Beatles films mirrored their musical evolution, proving they weren't just a band you listened to, but a cultural force that you watched unfold. But before all those other movies were made, it was time to get out of Green Street and find their own places to live.
So here I am now at number 57 Wimpole Street. It was here that Paul McCartney moved in with his girlfriend, Jane Asher. And it was in this very building that him and John Lennon wrote their first US #1, I Want to Hold Your Hand. And downstairs in the basement flat, they actually wrote the most recorded song of all time, of entire history. I'm talking, of course, about Scrambled Eggs.
Scrambled eggs, oh my baby, how I love your legs. Yeah, those were the original lyrics that Paul McCartney gave to the song Yesterday. You see, in 1964, Paul woke up in this London flat with the entire melody fully formed in his head. He was convinced he must have subconsciously copied it and spent weeks playing it to friends and musicians asking if anybody recognised it. And of course, nobody did. So, to avoid forgetting the tune, he gave it those lyrics. And for months, the song was simply known as Scrambled Eggs. It wasn't until later when Paul finally found the right words, turning it into Yesterday, and it became one of the most covered songs in music history, all starting with a dream and a plate of imaginary scrambled eggs.
So this house right here is number 7 Cavendish Avenue. It's just around the corner from Abbey Road Studios, and it was this property in 1966 that Paul McCartney bought and brought up his family here. He paid £40,000 for it. It's probably worth a couple more quid than that now. But it's still here and it's still owned by the McCartney family, so be a bit rude to pop in and ask if I can use the toilet, but I do need a wee. I better not.
One of the most amusing stories I read about this property was the fact that Paul wrote a song for the Abbey Road album after an incident that happened right here. And that song was called She Came Through the Bathroom Window. So this is Paul's house. He came all the way from the Cavern in Liverpool right here to Cavendish Avenue. But what about the other Beatles? Where did they live? Well, as if by YouTube magic, let's find out.
So welcome to number 34 Montagu Square. This house here was originally owned by George Harrison and then rented out to Ringo Starr, his good friend, and then he sublet it to Paul McCartney, Jimi Hendrix, but most famously John Lennon. John Lennon spent a lot of family time here with Yoko Ono, and it was here that they did the picture cover for the Two Virgins album. Yeah, you know that one? Yeah, I'll show you now. Yeah. Nobody wants to see that, do they? But it was also in this house where Jimi Hendrix wrote The Wind Cries Mary and loads of his great massive hits. And it's very famous as well that it was in this park just over the road where John and Yoko were arrested for smoking pot. And it was one of the main reasons he really struggled to get a green card when he was living in America. So there you go, kids. Don't do drugs. Or if you do, just don't get caught in the square doing them. There's also an urban myth that when John Lennon sent his MBE back, he posted it in this letterbox here. Got to be honest, I'm not entirely sure if that's correct, but hey, it's a nice story if it is.
Our next stop on this Beatles pilgrimage takes us to the Belgravia area of London, where we find the home of somebody known as the fifth Beatle, Brian Epstein. Epstein guided the band through the early years of Beatlemania, international tours, and then on to worldwide success. However, his sudden death in 1967 was a devastating blow, and many believe it marked the beginning of the band's eventual breakup. Brian died on August 27, 1967. He was only 32 at the time. He was found by his secretary in his London home after suffering an accidental overdose on sleeping pills. His passing sent shockwaves throughout the music world and marked the end of an era, not just for the Beatles, but for 1960s pop culture itself.
Now this house here is number 24 Chapel Street. This is the house that Brian Epstein lived in and sadly died in at the age of 32. The Beatles had loads of meetings here, but they had quite a few meetings around the back as well. I'll show you that. The Horse and Groom, the pub where the Beatles used to have little meetings when, let's see if I can get it in, turn him around. There it is, the place that the Beatles would have little meetings with Brian.
Well, the end is almost in sight. I've loved going around London finding all these amazing Beatles locations, but there's one we still have to visit, and sadly, it's the one where everything came to an end. That's right, it's over to Savile Row, and the very place the Beatles played their last ever live performance.
So we've reached the final stop on this Beatles pilgrimage, and I thought we'd do it in quite a swanky way. We're on Savile Row. How fancy is this? You see, Savile Row, number 3 in fact, was where the Beatles headquarters, Apple, was. And it was back in the January of July? January or July, began with a J, and it wasn't June. They stood on the roof here at number 3, Savile Row, and played their final concert together. And annoyingly, I can't get anywhere too close because they're doing quite a lot of roadworks. So there it is, or up there it was.
Don't worry, Neil, stock footage is here to save us. And it was January of 1969, the 30th in fact, and the Beatles gave their final live performance on this London rooftop. High above the roof of Apple Corps headquarters, the band surprised the city with an unannounced lunchtime concert. Office workers stopped in the streets, crowds gathered below, and London traffic slowed as the Beatles played songs such as Get Back, Don't Let Me Down, and I've Got a Feeling. It was raw, it was improvised and completely unscripted, the total opposite of Beatlemania's screaming stadiums. And, after about 42 minutes, the performance was famously shut down by the police, responding to noise complaints. It was the perfect goodbye. The Beatles back as a live band, playing above the city they'd conquered, without knowing it would be the last time they would ever perform together live.
So there we go, that brings us to an end to the video. I really hope you've enjoyed it. I've had the best day around London looking at all the Beatles places, and I decided to finish it here in St Pancras Gardens because this, as you can see from the bench, is where the Beatles had their famous Mad Day Out Beatles session, sitting right here on the 28th of July 1968. So thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you've enjoyed it, and if you have, don't forget to go and look at all the other Beatles videos that I've got and all the other videos on the channel. Give us a like, a thumbs up, a subscribe as well, and follow me on Instagram at Neil Hurst UK. And as always with these sort of touring around videos, I'm going to put links in the description to where you can find all these places, so go out and have your own little London Beatles adventure. Anyway, in the words of the Beatles, you say goodbye and I say, well, goodbye as well. See ya.